Let's continue with the next charge of medical experimentation. I'd like to pass over to the prosecutors for the prosecution now. You have 10 minutes to present your case.
Ladies and gentlemen, members of the jury, we are here to act as prosecutors in the trial of Nazi human experimentation.
What we are going to judge today is a series of crimes against humanity committed by a group of Nazi doctors and scientists as atrocious experiments and repeated torture on defenseless human beings. We are going to detail some of these experiments, and let me warn you, what you will hear and see here is about extreme cruelty and may offend your sensibility.
The doctors who we are judging are certainly guilty of crimes against humanity in addition to have violated the Hippocratic oath that doctors have been doing since the 15th century, where days were, and I quote, protect the sick and away from
The human body could be manipulated artificially. Mengele performed experiments on more than 2,000 pairs of twins prisoners, of which only about 200 survived. The twins must keep undressed and remain lay down side by side. Then, their anatomy was carefully measured and studied for hours, and they were classified by age and gender and shot in hand between experiments. They introduce injections of different chemical products in the eye to see if they can change the color, and also to the pregnant woman to get Siamese birth. Also, they injected tuberculosis to one twin and they leave the other without, to compare the effects. Then, if they didn't die, they murdered the child with an injection of chloroform directly to the heart.
Transplants. They extract section of bones, arms with shoulder blade and complete legs. Also extract nervous tissue and intern muscles, and they try to transplant to other victims. These experiments finish with the death of the patients because sections of the bones, muscles, and nerves were extracted from subjects without anesthesia. Freezing were divided in two parts. First, they studied and analyzed how many time needs the human body to decrease the temperature until die, and also which are the best ways to resurrect this victim. The main method was to place the person in a freeze tube. They were unclothed and a thermometer was introduced repeatedly to register the temperature drop during the medical proofs. This thermometer was fixed in its place using an expendable metal ring. The victim was exposed on a post in a freezing temperature outside.
Experiments with malaria. Over 1,000 people were using these experiments and more than half died as a result. They were infested by malaria with injections of infected blood to infest others.
Mustard gas experiment. They were deliberately exposed to mustard gas and other vesicants which inflict several chemical burns. The victims' wounds were then tested to find the most effective treatment for the mustard gas burns. Sulfonamide experiments is a chemical compound that is used today in pharmacy as combating diseases caused by bacteria. The purpose of the experiment was to try to cure the infection using sulfonamide drugs. Many victims of the experiment died as a result, and others suffered serious injury and intense agony. The experimentation with poison. They didn't have some scientific purpose of killing, it only used to test the time how it can kill a human and how long it took to survive, observing the pain and torment in order to study various methods to kill a human. These potions were secretly administered in the food of the experiment subjects.
Incendiary bombs experiments. The purpose of these experiments was to test the effectiveness of liquid solvent carbon and other liquids. High-altitude experiments. The prisoners were placed in a simulated altitudes of up to 2,000 meters pressure on the brains of victims who survived the initial experiment. 200 subjects and 80 people were killed and others were executed. we ask you to declare the accused guilty of crimes against humanity, to set us an example and never ever happen again this atrocity.
Adolf Hitler was responsible for all the scientific experimentation carried out during the Second World War, even though they didn't provide any documents that prove that he was directly connected with this experimentation. Instead, we as lawyers, for the defense of the account of the scientific experimentation, we're here today to demonstrate the innocence of the man Adolf Hitler. Not only we're going to exonerate Adolf Hitler, but we're also going to expose all the scientific advances that took place during the Nazi regime, which the humankind has benefited from.
Let's start off with Hitler's exoneration. In the first place, there is no proof of any official document signed by Adolf Hitler which corroborates that he authorized the experiments. We can demonstrate that the head chief of the German police, Heinrich Himmler, executed all the orders related to the authorization of the experiments. Heinrich Himmler organized the Wannsee Conference the 12th of January of 1492 in Berlin with the purpose of deciding the future of the Jew prisoners and to discuss the idea of using them for medical experimentation. However, it was his subordinate, Reinhard Heydrich, the one who carried out the task. 15 members that were head chiefs were the attendees to the conference.
Okay, so here we have a picture. Here we have a picture of the 15 attendants to the conference, and as you can see, there's no Hitler here.
With this conference, not only do we demonstrate that Hitler wasn't responsible for starting Nazi experimentation, but also that Hitler didn't organize or control everything that happened in his party or his regiment. At the same time, we have to say that Heinrich Himmler was an extremely powerful man in Hitler's government, who had undertaken all the police responsibility and decided by his own means to carry out the experiments in benefit of the supremacy of the Aryan race.
Hitler was occupied putting all his strength in extending the German Empire. So it's logical to think that he didn't do all the decisions about the regime. Himmler, not Hitler, executed all the orders related to experimentation and later on the final solution. So, as an example of this power demonstrated through a letter written by Göring after the Wannsee Conference to Richard Heinrich, with the purpose of executing the final solution. The final solution consisted on exterminating the Jewish population during World War II, as well as carrying out the experimentation mass.
Okay, so this is the letter, and if we can compare both signs, this is the Adolf Hitler sign, and this is Göring signs, and they are not the same signs.
Apart of this, Hitler was not a dictator. He was a dictator, not a scientist or doctor. So he wasn't responsible for the atrocities carried out by doctors such as Joseph Mengele, known as the Angel of Death, a man without pity who only cared about scientists' advance and not the morality of people.
This is a picture of Joseph Mengele, and now we are going to read to you the opinion from different historians about Hitler and the experiments. In 1960, Dr. Kubui, the Documentation Center of Tel Aviv, admitted the absence of any order issued by Hitler. There is no document signed by Hitler speaking of exterminating the Jews. The word extermination does not appear in the letter of Göring to Heydrich concerning the final solution of the Jewish question. In 1981, the historian Walter LaCube wrote in one of his books, "So far, not found any written Hitler to destroy European Jewish order or experimentation, and surely this order was never given."
Firstly, the majority of the conducted experiments had a positive purpose, such as eradicating disease like malaria or typhoid. They also developed and tested pharmaceutics and treatment methods for injuries and illness, as well as carrying out experiments to facilitate the survival of the Axis military personnel during the World War.
The most considerable were to start off the hypothermia advances.
The Nazi experimentation in this field has proven to be really useful nowadays. For example, in fact, we have Dr. Sigmund Rascher discovered a rewarming technique known as the rewarming rapid active rewarming to resuscitate any frozen victim and to remove the thermic shock. After the Nuremberg trials, the Nuremberg medical regulation was created, which has limited scientific research. So this Nazi data collected is really useful and has saved many lives. Next. Anti-smoking and alcohol law and campaigns. The Nazi Party approved a series of studies to carry out some research, and they came up with that smoking and cigarettes are directly related to lung cancer and other breathing diseases, as well as with alcohol. Then. We have the Hall-Gordon and Spatz syndrome discovery. This is a gradual degenerative mental disease. It was discovered by two Nazi scientists, Julius Hall-Gordon and Hugo Spatz. In addition, they also discovered they also made significant contributions in areas such as brain tumors, microcephalies, cerebral palsies, and promoted the classification and pathogenesis of mental illnesses in the first part of the 20th century. Nowadays, scientists recognize the important findings of both of these scientists. On behalf, they were against animal cruelty and promoted the first penal laws. Hitler was a man worried about his country, and therefore, in order to help change the economical situation, he also promoted sanitary programs and the quality of the third people. Social security was enhanced, was improved, and new jobs were created. To conclude, as a consequence to the unethical experiment, for the first time in the world, the actual legislation on the ethics of medicine was created. The Nuremberg Code in 1947. It's the first one in which we still base nowadays medicine, where the patient has to give its voluntary consent. Thank you.
Based on the statement of lawyers, the objective of Hitler would kill all the Jewish population, so he gave all the power to Hitler, a leading member of the Nazi Party, because Hitler was so sure that he could complete the mission that purifies our race. So it's very easy to understand. Like I kill people, many people with a gun, and your idea is like you're gonna accuse the guy, not me. So we should criticize and accuse the Hitler, but also the most important, we need to accuse the Hitler, because Hitler is the origin of these problems. And in the experiment with potion, they don't have any scientific purpose. The purpose of these experiments was killing the prisoners. And for example, between 1922 and 1943, the Nazis did a test study in a concentration camp. The effect of an experiment consists a lot of chemical elements and had been imposed on the prisoners, and they emitted a similar one on the battlefield. But in the 18th century, a doctor has been proved this experiment has no value. So the purpose of the experiments was killing the people.
And well, as my colleague said, the majority of experiments didn't conduct to any medical achievements, and also they could do those experiments on animals, and if they're successful, try them on humans. And in the majority of cases, the subjects were not conscious about the experiments. As example, we can give experiments on sterilization that they made the subject go in the room and complete the forms during 2-3 minutes, and they were sterilized without any conscience of subjects by X-rays. So, and also, the correct order of experimentation is the safety of medicines. Next step. Is experimentation in animals, if the result is positive, well, as I said, we can realize experiments on the human body. So, and also, all the experiments, the aim of those experiments was to help German army and to expand Russia race. And Mengele has promised, like all the doctors, protect the sick and away from them all harm and injustice. But all the experiments caused only pain and suffering, not any achievement.
Thank you for the intervention. I'll pass over to the lawyers now. You have 5 minutes to respond.
First of all, I'd like to remember that today here we're discussing Hitler's involvement with human experimentation and him being the responsible for the actions taken. And since there are no documents, no proof, no physical proof, no evidence that Hitler ever gave the order of starting these experimentations, we cannot accuse him of doing that. Instead, set yourselves, July 1942, Berlin, Heinrich Himmler held a conference with many German scientists. Hitler doesn't attend this conference. There, for the first time in the Nazi government during the Third Reich, we see anyone talking about human experimentation. Hitler wasn't present. Hitler never heard about that. Hitler didn't get involved. Hitler had bigger concerns, like he was in a war. He didn't have time to know everything going on in a concentration camp or human experimentation. He spent his time with trying to solve the problems in his country.
I would like to remark again that we are not here to defend the experiments or the scientists or the doctor. We are here to defend Adolf Hitler. On top of that, the prosecution has just said that the experiment had a scientific purpose. In our opinion, this is kind of insulting because we just have demonstrated that they were carried out like many scientific advances, and also to understand why they did these experiments, we have to put ourselves in the mind of that time. The doctors believed in eugenics and eugenism. They believed their race was superior. So in their opinion, they weren't experimenting with people, but with animals, because they believed the race was inferior. So that's the reason. And the other delegate, Mariona, has just explained that these experiments were extremely important because it's the first time that there was legislation about medicine. It's the first time it was created, and this is extremely important because this legislation is used nowadays, and without it, doctors could do whatever they wanted with patients. And also, Nazi science advanced a lot because they experimented with people, not with animals, and they discovered many things that happens to the human being that if they had experimented it with animals, they wouldn't have known. Thank you.
Actually, Nazi scientists had purposes, objectives behind all those experiments. We can argue if they were ethic or not, but we're here to exonerate. The defense is here to exonerate Adolf Hitler from the charge related to experimentation. Also, we recall the fact that Adolf Hitler was carrying out an expansionist plan, and his right-handed subordinate, Henry Himmler, with others like Göring or Reinhardt, were who decided to carry out all the extermination after the final solution in the conference on Wannsee. And as you've seen, we presented that there were actually scientific advances.
I would like to add that, do you really think that someone like Hitler with his health issues has the ability to control the war, Germany, the Holocaust, and the experiments?
To answer the question, please do not confuse the achievement in scientific research of human experimentation and the legitimacy of the experiment. And if we compare the achievement with the people died in the experimentation, families, brothers, and their child, do you think it's really necessary if we? Like Carlota said, it's true. Like we need many medical like we are using today. But if we compare to the people died in the experimentation, and I don't think it's necessary.
And also, Hitler wasn't like signing the attitude that he didn't sign any documents particularly, but Himmler he was like one of the most important leaders of the Third Reich, and Hitler, he was absolutely conscious about everything that happened because Himmler discussed all his decisions with Hitler, and that's why he approved it, that he's guilty, because he approved everything that Hitler decided.
And some experiments are illegal, so Himmler couldn't realize the experiment without the permission of Hitler.
The defense would like to remark that we aren't here today to demonstrate the progress of the experiments that were carried out during the Nazi regime, but to demonstrate that Adolf Hitler is innocent. As we have seen from all the proof shown, there is no official document that relates directly Hitler with the experimentation. Historians claim so, including Jewish historians. It was Himmler, not Hitler, the one who organized the conference that would later on detonate with the experimentation in mass. Moreover, Hitler himself isn't responsible for the experimentation on prisoners. This was carried out by heartless scientists like Mengele, who took advantage of the profession and experimented on human beings because the society had its own thoughts.
Apart from demonstrating the innocence of this man, Adolf Hitler, we have been able to demonstrate the different scientific advances that took part during Nazi science and that are now used in our lives. Wouldn't it be unfair to accuse someone for something that he didn't do? Adolf Hitler isn't responsible for the experiments. He may be many other things, but he's not responsible for the experiments. Also, he didn't have anything to do with experiments, but he never authorized it. On top of that, to conclude, it was people like Himmler, Heydrich or Mengele, but not Adolf Hitler. After all the evidence shown by the defense, the verdict of the jury and those present should be that Adolf Hitler is innocent.
Thank you. With this last intervention, we have finished the last charge of medical experimentation and the historical trial. We will now let the jury of Segundo Bachillerato evaluate the 4 charges discussed. I'll pass over to Ms. Walter now. Thank you for your attention.
Okay, just to finish the proceedings then this morning, I'd like to say thank you very, very much to all of the First de Bachillerato, all of the prosecution teams, all of the defence teams. You worked very hard to produce your arguments. I'd also like to thank Second de Bachillerato students for coming to watch and for listening to all the evidence that was presented. And later this morning, you will be making your final decisions as to which team, whether you think the prosecution made the case or the defence defended it better. I'd also like to thank Mr. Lockwood for coming on behalf of the senior leadership team, for coming to take part this morning, and obviously my colleague, Mr. Senor Rovira, for making all of this happen and for preparing the teams so well. Congratulations, everybody. Well done. And we'll make our decisions later today. Thank you.